Although the following demonstrations include a hand mold of a small child, we do not recommend that you attempt head molds, full arm or full leg molds of children, the elderly, or the infirm.
Hi, my name is Mark Prent, and in association with Pink House Studios, I'd like to welcome you to the first in our series of technical videos. In this video, we will demonstrate the making of a one-piece head mold from life. We will use a variety of materials. We will also demonstrate how to make a one-piece leg mold and one-piece arm mold. I am using Gypsona brand plaster bandages, which I have found to be the very best. Gypsona bandages are a fast-set, low plaster loss type. They are very thin but extremely strong and well impregnated with plaster powder. You can't just tear these as you can some of the others that are on the market. I'm cutting them into lengths of about 10 to 12 inches. I will use 3 rolls, which are a little more than I need, but it's always better to have too many bandages prepared rather than too few. I'm stacking them in 2s, alternating directions with each pair so that they will be easy to pick up. And these bandages will form a support structure for the alginate form mold. I'm also cutting up about a half a dozen narrow strips of bandage to apply over the nose area. I'll stack these in pairs as well. What essentially the styrofoam does is it acts as a binder in the alginate and tends to hold the alginate together really well, because alginate does tend to sag and drip quite a bit, and the styrofoam prevents some of that, or actually practically all of it. What the styrofoam will do is it also strengthens the alginate, makes it much more tear resistant, and also extends the material. Now we'll just vacuum this up. Now we'll cover the model to protect his clothing. Now there's no reason why you can't go further down on the neck and make the mold including part of the shoulder area, but in our demonstration we will just do the head including the neck. Okay, this is just a cheap hair gel. Any hair gel will do. And this will basically prevent the alginate from sticking to the hair. Now what this will do, of course, is flatten down the hair considerably, but you will still end up with all the texture of the hair. Now you do want to make sure that the hair goes all in one direction, straight back. Okay, now we'll put on a coat of petroleum jelly, but anything like this will work fine. We will also ask the model to put some cotton into his ears. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is the inside of the mouth. And we'll ask the model just to open up his mouth and put his tongue up on the roof of his mouth. Because really what we want to do in this particular case is we want to get the texture of the underneath of the tongue and the teeth and a little bit further behind the tongue in the back. So that's basically the position that he will be in when we make the mold. This is the dental alginate. And we'll just add water to this container first, and then to the water we will add the alginate. I'm going to ask the model to work this in around his teeth and around his tongue. Okay, we all set? I like to mix the algae form to a smooth, fairly thick consistency, so it won't tend to flow back into his throat. Now, you don't want to do this with someone that has no experience with alginate at all. So you might want to try this beginning with someone just having a smile, just so they get the feel of it, and not go for the entire interior of the mouth until the model is familiar with what it feels like and the procedure. What I'm going to do here now is I'm just going to add a small piece of styrofoam, and it'll act as a locking mechanism for the rest of the alginate that's going over the surface of this, and also for the plaster bandages which ultimately go over the alginate. Okay, I'm just going to trim a little bit of the excess over here. To make sure that the styrofoam really gets completely encapsulated with the alginate mixture and water, I find just using a jiffy mixer and the end of a drill works the best. Unlike a kitchen mixer, the jiffy mixer blades are specially designed not to suck air into the mixture. They are made of stainless steel, so they will not rust. However, the jiffy mixer must be cleaned very soon after each use. Even though in a soft, cured state it releases very easily from almost anything, when alginate dries out, it is extremely difficult to remove from any surface. So we're going to add our water first to our bucket. And these cups are actually 16-ounce cups. Now, it's not particularly crucial in what order you add the alginate or styrofoam to the water, since it's all going to get mixed up. Algiform is an alginate specially formulated to set more slowly than conventional alginates on the market. This allows me some precious extra minutes in working time. You will want to work quickly, but you should have enough time to cover the entire head. We will just start with the top of the head and work our way down. One of the first places you do want to get is right around the ears and inside the ears. And behind the ears, you've got to pull the ear back and get right behind the ear. And always move it in the direction of the hair. If you wish to mold a slight smile with lips parted but teeth together, you do not have to mold the mouth in a separate step from the rest of the head. The next really crucial spot to get is right in close to the nose on the eyes. because usually that's where air bubbles tend to build up. You want to always make sure the nostrils are free. You can go right up around the nostril. Just go nice and carefully. And one of the nice things about this mixture is it doesn't tend to run a lot. So there's less chance of it coming down and blocking the nostril. Want to build up the ears nice and thick so that area doesn't tear in the process of removing the alginate. Now you can see our alginate starting to set up. That's fine because we've just about used it all up. A part of the purpose of this video really is to show you how you can do this alone without the assistance of anyone else. Naturally, if you do have an assistant or can have someone help you, it makes everything that much easier. But with this slowed down alginate and this particular mixture, you do have enough time to cover the entire head on your own. Okay, and to the warm water, we're going to add some salt. And what this will do is it will help the bandages set up faster. And we just put in maybe a couple of tablespoons of salt. Just mix that up. And then we'll start. Now I'm picking these up in their thicknesses of 2 as I've laid them out. I'm just going to dip them in, let the excess run off. I don't squeeze them out or anything. Okay, if you'd like to turn to the side a little bit, please. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay them on like this, approximately just to the back of the ear. And just make sure they make good contact with the alginate. And as I go along, I'm going to overlap them generously. So really we end up with a thickness of about 4. I want to show you what the quality of these bandages is such that they become completely limp when wet and readily conform to the contours of the alginate. Yet they are extremely strong. And they're particularly good for making body molds for that reason also. Okay, I'm just going to ask you to turn around this way, please, a little bit. Going. That's great. Now, basically, you want to start with this side of the head, the whole back edge of this mold, because you want this to dry as quickly as possible. Because once this whole area is dry, you can start putting on your separator so that you can start building up the back half of the mold. So this part, this front part, doesn't really have to be dry before you start with the back, but this edge definitely has to be dry. Now you don't want to start with under the chin, because the problem is the bandages tend to fall off. But once you have your side pieces on, the bandages hold on quite nicely. Now sometimes what I'll do is I'll also stick a piece of styrofoam right in over here into the head area, as I did with the mouth. I didn't this time, but often it's not a bad idea to do that because it helps the bandages to adhere to the alginate, which you want them to do for this half. And you want to go with your fingertips over the entire surface, nice and gently, making sure it makes good contact with the alginate. The other thing you want to be careful of is you don't want to be pressing too hard on the model's head, because at this point you have a fair amount of alginate and bandages on, and so you have a little bit of a weight here. And if you start pressing hard, the entire head starts moving around, and the model may not feel very comfortable. So if you're going to press hard, or you're going to do any kind of moving, you want to at least have the other hand on the head, supporting the head. Okay, I'm ready to do a little bit of reinforcing around the nose. Just going to go over the tip of the nose. It's also a good idea while you're working on the model is to tell the model at what point you are during the mold making process, because the model has no idea whether you're just at the beginning or at the end, whether you've got 10 minutes more to go or a half an hour more to go. This is already almost completely dry on the sides, and that's what we want. So even though this front is still wet, the sides are dry, which means we can actually go on with the back half. I'm just going to create a little bit of a clay slip. This is a water-based clay to act as a separator between the layers of bandages. Now you can use liquid soap as a separator, you can use Vaseline, you can use almost anything. I prefer a clay slip because it colors the surface, and that way you can see very easily where the overlap occurs, and so there's no problem ever finding the seam. That's particularly important if you're doing full body mold, because depending on the position a person's in, you can have some very complex seams, and sometimes it can be difficult to find them, especially if your bandages aren't always as neat as they perhaps should be. But this eliminates that problem, and the clay acts as a wonderful separator. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these bandages and I'm going to fold them back on themselves, probably about anywhere from 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And I'm going to overlap by about 1 inch or so the other bandages. Now the purpose of folding this back on itself is to make this edge particularly strong, because later when we go to take this apart, we're going to lift this back a little bit and we're going to pull on this. So we want this to be quite strong. And so that strength goes onto the bandage, over the seam, and just past the seam onto the other side. Now you have a thickness of 4 there, but since we're overlapping as we're going along, you're really going to end up with a thickness of 8. Again, I'll fold that back on itself, and I'll overlap. And again, you can see that I'm doing the edge first, because I want that to dry the fastest. And I'll put one more down at the bottom around the neck here. I'm just going to trim off some of this excess, and we'll just wait a few minutes for that to dry, and then we can start removing it. Now you want to slide the tip of the spatula under the seam and gently lift it and move along the entire seam in order to free the back half of the support structure from the front. Okay, we're going to remove the back now. And I'm just going to ask you, just hold your support to the front of your face, please. And I'm just going to pull on this gently. And there we go. Now I'm going to cut in a zigzag pattern up the back of the alginate. And I'm just doing it in a zigzag pattern to make sure that the seam joins up. And you just want to sort of gently ease it in there so you feel you've reached a space. Should be where his hair is. The other advantage of a zigzag pattern is that if the seam for some reason shows, it's less obvious than a straight line is. Although in a texture like hair, it probably wouldn't make a great deal of difference. And now basically he's just going to remove this like a large helmet. I'm just going to go behind here a little bit just to spread the alginate apart and unlock his ears. Okay, go nice and slow now. You don't want to rush this at all because you don't want the alginate to tear. Certainly less chance of it tearing using the styrofoam because the styrofoam does give it considerable strength. Nice and slowly. There we go. And you can see it's quite rigid, not very fragile at all, and will fit together quite nicely. Has a good thickness to it, which is what the styrofoam really does for it. And basically we'll just snap this back on. And the seam lines up really nicely. Now all I'll do is just bandage up this seam over here all around before we pour the plaster. And I'm going to put one set of bandages right around the entire neck area just to be certain that it doesn't suddenly fly apart because of the pressure or the weight of the plaster. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a little bit of clay and create a kind of sausage-like shape that I can stick into the nostrils from the outside of the mold. And thereby creating a nostril type space on the inside of the nose rather than having to carve it out later. It's a lot easier to do it this way. Just make another little one. The only thing you want to be careful of is not making it too thick because you don't want it to push against the edge of the alginate, because if you do that, it will tend to distort the alginate and thereby getting a distorted nostril. So you want to make the clay sausage shape somewhat smaller than the actual hole that's there. And I'll just take a bandage and just go over that, just in case any plaster pours out. Okay, now I'm just going to go inside just to check the nostril shapes and make sure that they're not pushing against the alginate. There usually is a saliva buildup around the teeth and the tongue, and that really has to be sponged up somehow because saliva is a lot thicker and gooier than just water, and that saliva will prevent the plaster from setting up properly. Okay, we're ready to pour the plaster now. And you just want to cradle this head into something soft. Because of the weight of the plaster, this will get quite heavy. And if it's pressing down on its nose or chin on a hard surface, it might cause it to push in, and thereby creating some kind of distortion. So you want to create basically a support structure around the head. Now the way we mix plaster, and this happens to be just molding plaster, there are harder plasters available like hydrocal, which are perhaps more ideal, but molding plaster works also. We just keep adding plaster to the water until it's saturated. And we know when it's saturated when there's a little bit of plaster floating on the surface of the water that is no longer being absorbed by the water and just sort of sits there. But sometimes you want to wait about 10 or 15 seconds just to be sure. And that's really what it should look like. And you can see that's not disappearing. So we do know it's saturated at this point. All I'm doing is squeezing out any little lumps that may be in there. Once you get up to the teeth, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a little brush, and I've just cut off the handle so that I can go inside. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press up against the upper teeth and then press down against the lower teeth just to make sure the plaster gets into all the little crevices. Because when you get little depressions like that, sometimes the plaster just sort of floats right over the surface and doesn't make really good contact, and you get little air bubbles in there against the teeth, and the teeth don't come out fully. Once you get up to the ears, you want to work your fingertips into the ear cavities and gently spread apart the alginate slightly so that the plaster can flow into the spaces. This will prevent any air from getting trapped. If you want to make absolutely certain that both ears get filled completely without trapping air, before beginning to pour any plaster into the head, you may also turn the head first to one side and pour that ear. Let it set, then rotate it to the other side and pour the other ear. Once both ears have set, you can reposition the mold and pour the head. And you should wait at least an hour for this plaster to set up before trying to remove it. We can simply tear away the bandages. Now in these head molds, we use petroleum jelly on the hair and hair gel. But if for some reason you didn't need the texture of hair, you can simply put on a bald cap or a swimming cap, and you'd probably want to cut out the ear shape around the edge of the cap, and you could just do the entire head without worrying about the hair at all. And here you can see part of our seam where a little bit of the plaster leaked out. And there's the texture of the hair. Now you want to be careful when you're removing the alginate from around the ear, because the ear is quite delicate. This just being molding plaster, you don't want to break the ear at all. Now we come to the delicate part, which is just removing all the alginate from the inside of the mouth. And actually, when you get down to the mouth area, you really have to start working with some smaller tools, like little dental tools. And here it is all cleaned up. But this probably took about half an hour of picking away to get everything out of the inside of the mouth. I do not recommend that you attempt this mold with other silicone-based rubbers, as there may be some toxicity involved. Pliolife is a medical-grade silicone rubber developed especially to go on the skin. Pliolife is not recommended for molding wide-open mouths. The cured Pliolife material is much more rigid when molded in a mass and will resist rapid removal. Parted lips with teeth together may be molded with Pliolife. Pliolife with some of this screening material. And this is sometimes known as fiberglass screening and sometimes known as wire cloth. It's available actually at your local hardware store. It's quite common material. And as you can see, it's quite strong, virtually impossible to tear with your hands. And that in turn will make the silicone rubber tear resistant. And although with the alginate it's not necessary to cover the eyelashes or eyebrows with Vaseline, when using the silicone rubber, we do want to put on a layer of Vaseline over the eyebrows and eyelashes. Pliolife is a two-component rubber. I'm mixing equal parts of the base and the catalyst. Once again, we will mix the components with a Jiffy mixer, this time using a smaller one. Now the advantage of the silicone rubber over the alginate is that if there are no extreme undercuts, the mold of course is reusable, whereas an alginate mold wouldn't be because it would start to distort as it would dry, and the silicone rubber is extremely stable. The other big advantage of the silicone rubber is that you can cast material into it that you cannot cast into alginate. For instance, you can cast fiberglass and polyester resin into silicone rubber, which you can't do with alginate because of the moisture in the alginate prevents the resin from curing. It's not necessary to try to mold the entire head using one batch of Pliolife, since lap lines would not likely be visible where one batch of Pliolife met another. Unlike alginate, Pliolife conforms so closely to the skin, once cured, that there will be none of the seepage of fresh material under the cured portion of the mold, or separation, as occurs when fresh alginate is applied next to cured alginate. We could have made a full one-piece head mold using Pliolife, as we did in alginate. This is just a brief demonstration of Pliolife's possibilities for the mold maker. A Pliolife mold requires no separator, whether you're casting your positive in plaster, resin and fiberglass, or wax. I'm now applying pieces of screen cloth over the Pliolife in order to increase the durability of the mold. This is not really necessary unless you expect to reuse the mold a number of times. The use of the screen reinforcement ensures that over a longer period of time your Pliolife mold will not tear. Once again, we are applying bandages for support, as in the previous head mold demonstration. We are removing the mold very slowly to allow the hair to slide out. So you can see here the really nice sort of detail of the hair that the silicone has picked up all across the top of the head and part of the side. As you can see, when screening is embedded into Plyo-Life, it results in a very tough, tear-resistant mold. Plyo-Life is available in two forms, the blue low viscosity and the gray thixotropic. Both forms will adhere to each other. You can apply the thixotropic directly against the skin, but you may tend to end up with air bubbles. If you lay up the screening against the thixotropic layer, it will seep through the pores of the screen and anchor it firmly to the mold. If you choose to apply the screening to the low viscosity Plyo-Life, it will be necessary to apply another layer of Plyo-Life in order to sandwich the screening firmly in place. Either approach will work. Now for making a complete head mold using Plyo-Life, you will notice here that I have left a very narrow space running down the back of the head, which has not been reinforced with screening. This was for the cut, so that the model could ease out of the mold. To unmold the positive, just use a utility or mat knife and cut up the side of the neck and along the ridge curve of the ear. So the back side of the mold is left on one side of the cut, and the front of the ridge and hollow of the ear are on the other side of the line. Then make a similar cut in the Plyo-Life along the other ear. Here you can see the mark my knife made while cutting the Plyo-Life. This is an example of a second casting made from the Plyo-Life mold. As you can see, the seam along the neck and along the ridge of the ear are very slight, and some careful scraping will remove it. As an alternative to attempting to save the banded shell for reuse, after pouring your positive but before unmolding the Plyo-Life, discard the bandages and build a 2 or 3 piece reinforcing shell of polyester resin and fiberglass over the Plyo-Life mold, or make a traditional 2 or 3 piece plaster support structure. If you want to save the bandage support structure, you will have to reinforce it with more bandages. This is our model, Jesse. He's going to hold a little marble in his hand. We're going to make a mold of his hand holding the marble. And we have equal amounts of water, alginate, and styrofoam in volume. And we have about 3/4 of a cup in each. Okay, would you like to pour the alginate in here, please?
All of it?
All of it. Go ahead, dump it in. Hurry up, please. There you go. Okay, fine, thank you. Pour in the styrofoam, please. Go ahead. All right. Thank you. I'll take that. Okay. Now I'd like you to concentrate on the marble, okay, please?
Does it look like oatmeal, Daddy?
Yes, it looks like oatmeal, but it doesn't taste like oatmeal.
Yeah. It will taste like alginate, styrofoam, and water.
Okay, we just want to fill up your whole hand with this material. Look at the material, please, and think about the marble, because I want you to concentrate on holding on to the marble. We don't want to let the marble drop.
Fast, you're almost finished.
Well, not quite.
but almost right.
Well, almost. Yeah, that's good. That's perfect. Thank you.
You're finished.
Just about. It's all set up. Now be careful. No, don't pull out your hand yet. Let me get my hand out first, please, because I'm all covered with alginate. Okay, just hang on to that, please. Don't try moving your hand yet. First, I want to get rid of this alginate that's hanging off the edge. Okay. There we go. Okay, now leave the marble behind. And just slowly move your hand inside. Don't pull it out suddenly, just pull it very slowly. Okay? Slowly. Just wiggle your way out. Slowly, please. Very slowly. Slowly. There we go. Thank you. I'm just going to pour in a tiny bit at a time, just to make sure the fingers fill up properly. Just to be certain there are no air bubbles, I'm just going to pour some of it out, and let it flow back in. I'll just do that a couple of times. Now, the only thing you really have to be careful about is, for instance, if the hand was in a position like this, then you can't simply expect the plaster to go all the way to the fingertip by keeping it in that vertical position. Because once you pour plaster into the mold, you actually have to turn the mold in that direction and then agitate it so that the plaster will go down into that fingertip. Okay, now we'll just insert this steel bar into the hand. Plaster is starting to set. And then we'll just wait probably about a half hour or so, and then we can unmold it. And there's a marble. At this point, we want to be fairly careful, because the fingers are quite delicate because they're so small. And you can see that this is so accurate that you can actually move the marble around between his fingers. I'm just going to set this up on the stand now. And there you go. I'll just ask the model put his hand in here and swish it around so it gets nicely coated. Okay, go ahead. This is a nice thick mixture. You don't get a lot of runs or drips. Okay, it sets up fairly quickly. That's pretty much all we need. Because it's so thick and dense, and the styrofoam really gives it a fair amount of strength, we don't need any bandages to support it. Now, this particular algiform is equivalent to the regular dental material in terms of setting up time. It's not the slow set. I don't think we need the slow set, so we're not using it. So you just gently want to move your fingers around inside. And take your time. Nice and slow. Using the proportions we have in this mixture, there is insufficient moisture to adversely affect the pouring of a wax positive. I've melted ordinary wax used for bronze casting, and I am now pouring it into the algiform mold. The wax is now beginning to set, so I can insert a piece of steel rod just for display purposes. If your alginate is a more liquid consistency, as it would be were you making an arm or leg mold, before pouring a wax positive, you would probably have to invert the mold and allow any pooled water to drain. Then, go in there with an absorbent paper towel and blot up as much moisture as possible. Finally, you can blow some air into the mold using a compressor. This will help evaporate any excess moisture on the surface. And yes, you can see there aren't really any air bubbles at all on the surface. So the moisture in the alginate really had no effect on the wax at all. Okay, I'll now demonstrate the procedure for a one-piece arm and hand mold. I will cut a length of Simpliflex and form it into a sealed cylinder by applying tape. This material may be reused since neither alginate nor plaster will adhere to it. Using a compass, I am scoring a disc on another piece of Simpliflex to fit on the end of the cylinder. And I'll just tape this down. And once again, we'll use a jiffy mixer and we'll sift in the alginate. I'm using proportions of about 3 pounds of algiform to 1.5 gallons of water. As in the child's mold, I am holding a marble. And I'll just wait here for about 5 minutes, and this should set. Okay, so this takes a little bit of patience and wiggling around to free your arm, because basically you have to get some air down from the upper arm all the way down to your fingertips so that your hand and arm will release. I recommend that you try to allow a thicker layer of alginate than we have here between the arm and the Simpliflex. You need the extra give provided by a thicker cushion of alginate in order to wriggle free of the mold. Here you can see the detail on the inside of the mold. And I'm just going to start off again by just pouring down a little bit down into the fingertips and pour some of it out. Really, I just want to make sure there are no air bubbles down there in the fingertips. And we'll just fill this right up to the top. And I'm just going to slice along the seam. And of course, these are reusable, these forms. It may look like we've used a lot of alginate, but in fact, it was a very liquid mixture, and so it's mostly water. Some slight distortion at the fingertips may occur due to the weight of the material above. However, this effect will diminish if the complete arm is not molded all the way up to the shoulder. If just the hand is molded, or the arm up to the elbow, no distortion will occur. The slight distortion that may occur in full arm and hand molds does not happen with full leg and foot molds. In this demonstration, we will be using the prototype of a newly developed leg form from Pink House Studios. The production model, while essentially the same, may differ slightly. This form can be adapted to fit a leg of almost any circumference by cutting or untaping the center joint and nesting the halves. In these prototypes, you cannot see the center joint. Okay, what we have here is the one-piece leg form, and now we'll demonstrate how to make a one-piece leg and foot mold. This is actually a prototype. We have two versions. We have a large version here and a medium-sized version over here. We will also later have a smaller version. By the time this videotape comes out, these forms will be available. And basically what we have here is a form that's been cut away down the back of the leg and partially sliced towards the front of the foot, just maybe about 3 inches on either side. And the model will slide his leg into this form. We will tape up these sections. Then alginate will be mixed up and poured in through this funnel section in the front of the leg. After the alginate has set, the model will remove his leg. What we will do is we will first cut away this section as it is now. This section need not be cut away at this point. This will remain taped. The only reason we have to cut this section away over here is because as the model pulls out his leg, his heel will have to come out in this direction. And by the time his heel is up towards his calf, there will be enough space inside the form that this does not have to really have any give, because at that point the leg will be pretty much free and he can pull out his leg entirely. Then we'll just have to retape this section down here and these seams here. This will remain taped. Then we'll pour plaster into that alginate form. Once that's set, we'll cut this away again, only this time we'll have to cut this out so that the entire alginate form with the plaster positive can be removed through the back of this form. It will simply slide out, and then we can peel the alginate off of the leg. Now the mixture that we're using is quite a liquid mixture. It's not anywhere near as thick a mixture as we would put on the hand or on the head. And we will use the medium-sized form for him. Well, let's move around this way, please. Okay. These X's are registration marks that run all the way down the length of the leg on the seam. They are guides for realigning the support structure after the mold has been opened to mid-calf in order to allow the model to free himself. I have mixed up 2 batches of alginate, each comprised of 1.5 gallons of water and 3 pounds of alginate. Okay, can you lift up your foot, please? Just want to move your foot around. Slow set alginate has been specially formulated with Pink House Studios to work with warm water and still allow 8 to 10 minutes of working time. This unprecedented development will be especially appreciated by the model for a one-piece leg mold, since ordinary alginate would feel extremely cold. Okay, we're ready to open up the mold now. And we're just going to slice along this seam. Okay, now we're going to cut a zigzag pattern up the back of this section over here. Finding the point at which his calf is can be a little tricky. Just want to go in very gently and just try and tear the alginate to that point that his leg is exposed. I'm going to ask you now to try to move your foot inside the mold, wiggle your toes around, see if you can begin to try and lift up your heel. Now the biggest problem here is not so much that it's sticking to his leg as is just a question of the suction and trying to get air down there underneath his foot, because that's really where the greatest amount of suction is occurring, on the bottom of the foot around the heel. Now he has a little bit of petroleum jelly on his legs, but if you didn't have very much hair or had shaved, then you wouldn't need any kind of separator at all. I'm just pressing down on the alginate near his heel so it doesn't lift up with his foot. I can see his heel now starting to lift up. Now the foot's coming out. We'll just press this together again, seal it up, and then we can pour our positive. A little bit sideways here, please. Now this happens to be very strong tape, so it's good for this purpose, because I can actually use the tape to pull this right around to pretty close to the registration marks that I have there. And now we have to seal up this entire surface just to be certain that no plaster pours out. Now here you can get a pretty good idea of the seam, and you can see how close the seam really is. It's just about perfect. Sometimes it will be slightly off on the inside. One edge will be pushed in a little bit further than the other, and that's very easy to adjust. I want to tilt this forward so that the toes end up filling up with plaster. If you just pour straight in and fill it up without tilting it, you do tend to end up with air bubbles up on the top of the foot and the top of the toes. You just really want to get it filled up to just about the point of the ankle, and then we can straighten it out again and fill up the rest. Okay, there we go. Now we just have to wait for this to dry, and then we can open it up. Keep in mind that the bottom of the foot rests directly on the bottom of the plastic shell with no alginate beneath it. If you think you may have to move your mold, keep it on a dolly so there won't be any seepage of the plaster between the bottom of the alginate and the plastic shell. We're now ready to take apart the leg mold. And we'll just cut up along that seam. And we'll just cut away the alginate. Okay. These little air bubbles are very easy to get rid of. Just have to do that. And they'll just pop right off. And here you can see our seam at the back. I'm just going to chop that off a little bit. The alginate doesn't have to be this thick. I used a larger form than was necessary for this model, but since the forms are available in different sizes, you can use one that conforms more closely to your model's leg. We've patched up the seam in the back, and it was right down over here. And of course there was no seam up here, so that's all perfect. Instead of cutting the seam line of the alginate with a spatula, here's a quick and easy trick. I am using the plaster cast of a leg as my model for this demonstration. I'm taking a length of dental floss, taping it along the leg where I want my seam to be. For the comfort of your model, use only the minimum amount of tape necessary to hold the dental floss in place. Here I'm really using more than necessary. The tape may pull right out of the mold together with the dental floss, or it may sometimes remain on the leg after the dental floss has been pulled through. If your model has excessive hair on the legs, you may find it difficult to effectively tape the dental floss against the skin, so cutting the algiform might be a more appropriate solution. As you will note, I have left a little tail of floss at the top. I'm using ordinary cellophane tape. Of course, when you do this on a live model, you will want to apply the dental floss and tape before any petroleum jelly if needed. If you plan to cut the alginate from bottom to top in order to have the model ease straight out of the back, you will have to open the entire support structure from bottom to top. The model can then slide into it through the flaps without bending his or her leg. This way, he or she can avoid dislodging the taped dental floss. I've left another small tail of dental floss at the bottom of the leg. I'm now applying a strip of cellophane tape over the length of the dental floss. The bottom tail is extending out through the back of the Simpliflex system. Now I'm sealing the seam of the Simpliflex. This is a very high quality tape that adheres to form an exceptionally strong seal. It is also waterproof. Pour the alginate and let it set. I'm removing the tape, peeling back the Simpliflex. I'm now going to pull gently but firmly on the dental floss. You could pull it from both ends at the same time if you wish to. You can see the cellophane tape coming out of the mold with the dental floss. It's a good idea to hang on to the top tail while doing this. And there's the tape and the dental floss. Notice how clean and neat the cut is. In this particular mold, the alginate is not very thick. However, the dental floss trick will work no matter how thick the alginate is.
All products used in the preceding demonstrations are available from
next technical video, we will learn how to shrink a life-size head down to half its size, 1/4 its size, or even down to the size of a coin. This process requires no modeling, no measuring, and no mathematics. The results are amazingly accurate. On the same video, we will also learn how to enlarge almost any object, figurative or not, to double its size.
Other titles in the Mark Prent Pink House Studios series of technical videos include